Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to part 10 of 25 beginner JavaScript projects. In this application, we're going to show you how to create this tip calculator. I created a website dedicated to the projects that we're going to be building in this series. You can find it at jsprospect.com. I also talk a little bit about the technologies that you need to become a web developer. And you can even access the tutorials directly from here. So if you wanted to watch this one, just click it and you can watch the tutorial here. If you want to learn more about these projects, you can click here. And I wrote a small article that talks about each project. You could even test the project out before you build it. So let's say that you wanted to test this one out. You can click here and you can test out the project. If you want to learn how to host your applications the way I did here, I wrote an article that shows you how to do it. So just click on this link and it's going to take you to this article, host your website for free with GitHub Pages. And here I show you the steps that you need to take to host your application on GitHub Pages. There's only 4 steps, so it's actually very simple to do. All right, before we get started, we want to go grab the font Awesome Cdn because we are going to use icons for this project. So let's search for font Awesome Cdn and we're going to click on this link from cdnjs.com. Let's copy the first URL and we're going to paste that up here. So just type in link and Control V and we now have access to font Awesome. All right, let's begin here inside the body. We're going to create a container. Let's give it a class of container. And let's create another container within this container. Let's give this a class name of calculator. Let's give this a title. We're going to call it tip calculator. And we're going to add some styling to this. We're going to use text align center and font weight bold. All right, we're going to add a border underneath this title. So let's create a p tag. Let's leave it empty. And we're going to use border bottom, 2 pixels, solid, light gray. Let's hover over this and we're going to go with the RGBA value of 0.5 here. All right, let's create a space and let's create a label for our first input box. We're going to type in amount here and this is going to say bill amount. Let's create another space and let's create a button and an input box. Let's add an ID here of amount. And right in the center here between the 2 button tags, we're going to add an icon. So let's go search for one. So let's search for font Awesome. Let's click on icons. And we're going to search for the $ symbol. This one here. So let's click that. And let's copy the HTML. And we're going to paste it right in the center here. All right, let's create 2 spaces. And we're going to create another label. This one is going to be for the guests. So let's type in number of guests. Let's create another space, another button here, and another input box. So we're going to give this an ID of guest and let's go search for another icon. Let's just click back here. And for this one, we're going to search for Mel. Let's go with this one here. Let's copy the HTML. And once again, we're going to place it in the center here. All right, let's create 2 more spaces, and another label. This one is going to be for quality. Let's type in service quality. And another space. For this one, we're going to use the select tags, and we can remove this here. Let's add an ID of quality. And let's add a couple of options in here. The first one is not really going to be an option, so we're going to remove the value there, and we're going to type in disabled selected value equals 0. So this is just going to say choose. And let's create another option. This one is going to have a value of 0.3, which is 30%. So let's type that in here, 30%. This means that the service was outstanding. All right, let's actually copy this 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is going to be 20%. This is 15%. And 10%. And this is 5%. We can actually delete this one. I added one more by mistake. And let's also change this here. So this is 20%. We're going to add good. For 15, it's going to say it was okay. For 10%, it's going to say bad. And for 5%, it's going to say terrible. All right, so if we click on this, now we have this drop-down menu. And let's create another div tag here. This is where our button is going to go. Let's split that up. And we're going to add some styling to this. We're going to use text align center. And before creating the buttons, we're going to add another border here. So let's create a p tag. We're going to leave it empty. And we're going to use border top, 2 pixels, solid, light gray. Once again, we're going to hover this, and we're going to go with 0.5. All right, now let's create our button. This one is going to say calculate. We're going to add an on click to this one. We're going to call in a function called calculate. And let's also add some styling to this one. We're going to give it a border radius of 5 pixels. And we're also going to add a width of fit content. And right underneath this container here, this is going to be the calculator container. So right underneath that one, we're going to add another div tag. We don't have to split this one up. We're going to add an ID to this one. This is where we're going to display the tip amount. So let's add an ID of tip amount. All right, and I forgot a V there. All right, and that's going to be it for the HTML. All right, we're going to start in the body. Let's give this a height of 100 VH. Let's change the font family. Let's go with Cambria. And I'm going to paste the background color that I had for the original project. All right, go ahead and copy that. That was rather long, so I don't feel like typing all that. But it's not too bad, so just go ahead and pause the video and copy that. For the container, let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid black. Let's change the width to 95%. Let's make the container the size of the window. Let's place the container in the center with margin auto, and let's turn it into a flexbox. Now let's place the contents within this container in the center and in the middle with a line item center. For the calculator container, we're going to go with a border of 1 pixel solid, light gray. Let's change the background color to white smoke. And let's give it round edges with border radius 5 pixels. Let's change the width to 400. Let's place it in the center with margin auto. And let's give it a padding from left to right of 25 pixels. And we're going to change the font size to 1 rem. Let's make the font a little bit lighter with font weight. We're going to go with the lowest setting of 100. And let's also give this a box shadow. I'm going to go with 0, 2 pixels, 4, 0, black. All right, let's hover this and let's go with 0.5. For the input box, we're going to go with box sizing border box. Let's give it a width of 90% and a padding of 8 pixels. Let's remove the outline. Let's give it round edges. And let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid light gray. Oops. This is light gray. And we're going to remove the border radius from the top left. So let's set that to 0. And also from the bottom left. For our button, let's change the width to 10%. Let's give it a padding of 8. Let's remove the outline. Let's give it a cursor pointer. And let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid light gray. Let's give it round edges. 5 pixels, and we're going to remove the round edges from the top right, so let's set that to 0, and we're also going to remove them from the bottom right. Let's also change the background color. We're going to go with white smoke. All right, let's give it a hover effect. So when we hover it, we want it to turn black, but let's go with the lowest setting of 0.1. For this input box, let's change the width to 100%. Let's give it a padding of 8 pixels. Let's remove the outline. Let's give it a border radius of 5 pixels. A border of 1 pixel solid light gray. And that should do it. Now we're going to create the container that holds the little message that's going to pop up when you click on the calculate button. Of course, it's going to display how much you owe. So we're going to create this, but we're going to hide it because we don't want to display it on the screen. We only want to display it when we click on the calculate button. But let's go ahead and create it. So we gave that div an ID of tip amount. All right, so the first thing we're going to add is a visibility of hidden, but we're going to comment this out Otherwise, we won't be able to see what we're doing here, but we'll comment it out before we move on. All right, let's give this a minimum width of 250 pixels. That means this is going to be at least 250 pixels. Let's place it in the center with margin auto. And let's change the background color. I'm going to go with lime green. And I'm also going to change the color of the text to white. And I want it to come off the bottom by 30 pixels. So let's set that to 30. Let's use text align center for the text. Let's give it border radius of 2 pixels. And let's give it a padding of 16 pixels. Let's also give it a position of fixed and a z index of 1. Actually, in this case, we're not going to need that. So let's go ahead and remove that. All right, here it is. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hide it because we don't want to display it on the screen just yet. All right, so this tip amount show, this is a class that we're going to create with JavaScript. So we only want to display that tip amount whenever, we tell it to. So at this point, we're going to set visibility to visible. And we're also going to create 2 animations. So we're going to call the first one fade in. This is going to last 0.5 seconds. And the other one, we're going to call it fade out. This is going to last 0.5 seconds. All right, we can copy this up to the animation piece and Control V to paste it here. So this is just accounting for different browsers, and this is a fallback setting for the animation. All right, now we're going to create the animations. So the first one, we called it fade in. For this one, we're going to set the bottom to 0 and the opacity to 0. And we want it to end at 30. And at that point, we want to give it a opacity of 1. So it's going to start off at 0, opacity of 0. That means it's not going to display. And then it's going to go all the way to 30 pixels from the bottom, and it's going to display. We can copy this. And let's remove the WebKit here. We could just do add keyframes. All right, let's copy this, both of these, and we're going to create the other animation of fade out. So let's change this to fade out, and let's change this as well. And for this one, we're basically going to switch these. So let's switch that. We're just going to change this to from, and this is going to be to. And you know what? Let's actually delete this one, and we're just going to copy this one. Let's just remove the WebKit. All right, so our 2 animations are set. Let's remove this border before we go any further. I just wanted to show you what we were doing. All right, let's open this up. And that looks pretty good. Let me see how this looks in a phone. So I'm going to copy this. All right, and it's looking pretty good from 480 and up. The only thing that I want to change here at 320 is these buttons. I want to make them a little bit wider because they're a little bit too thin. And of course here I want to make sure that this is in the same line. So let's fix that. All right, let's add a media query of max width 480 pixels. At that point, I'm going to make the input box a little bit smaller. So we're going to change the width to 85%. And let's copy this. We're also going to, since we made the input box smaller, let's make the button a little bit bigger. All right, and let's copy this. So this is going to be a media query for 320 pixels. And we don't need to do anything to the button, but for the input box, we're going to change this to 80%. All right, let's see what this looks like now. All right, and that looks good enough to me. So that's what we're going to go with, and that's going to be it for the CSS. All right, before we start, we want to turn these input boxes into type number. I accidentally forgot to do that. So let's go back to our HTML and let's go to our input box. And instead of type text, we're going to type in number. And that's going to give them these little arrows here that allow you to increase or decrease the number. All right, let's get access to these three input boxes. We're going to start with amount. We're going to use get element by ID, and we gave this one an ID of amount. Let's copy this 3 times. This is going to be for guests, quality, and this is the container that's going to display the tip amount. All right, now let's create the function that calculates how much you owe. Let's use an arrow operator to create this function. And for those that never used these kinds of functions, this basically means the same thing as this. So these two are the same thing. All right, let's create a variable that's going to hold how much you owe. And we're going to calculate that by multiplying the amount by the quality of the service. And we're going to divide that by the guests. Let's use 2 fixed with this because we only want to return 2 decimal places. And at this point, we're going to clear the fields. So let's set all of them to an empty string. All right, this works great. The only problem is if you click on this button and the user hasn't filled out the input fields, it's going to return a value of NaN, and we don't want that. So let's create an if statement that checks for that. So if tip contains NaN, we want to display a message that says tip $0 each. And we also want to call on the function that's going to display this. We're going to call that show tip amount, and we're going to create that in a moment. But if the input fields are filled out correctly, then we want to display how much you owe. So this is where we're going to use the tip variable that we just created. And we're also going to call on the show tip function. All right, let's go ahead and create that function now. For this one, we're going to create a variable, call it x, and we're going to initialize it to the tip amount. We're going to change the class name to show. And remember, this class show is the one that we were adding some features to here. So this one is going to set this div here to visible because we set it to hidden. So this is going to display this, and when it displays it, it's going to add the animation that we created here. But we only want it to last 3 seconds on the screen. So we're going to use set timeout. Let's create a function in here. This is going to change the class name from show back to what it was. Let's use replace. So we're going to replace show with an empty string. And we want it to last 3 seconds on the screen. So we're going to use 3000 milliseconds, which is equivalent to 3 seconds. All right, now when we click this, this displays a 0. And if we fill this out appropriately, it's going to tell us how much we owe in tip. In this case, we owe $2.70. And that's how you build this tip calculator. I'll see you guys in project number 11.